When Caleb Merrick's mail-order bride stepped off that dusty stagecoach in 1877 Wyoming, he expected nervousness, maybe hope, in her eyes. What he got was a woman who flinched like she'd been struck before his hand even moved. Then he saw them. The scars she tried to hide beneath long sleeves, the marks of surviving something most folks couldn't imagine. He didn't know her story yet, but he knew one thing. Whatever hell she'd escaped, it had followed her west. And some debts, he'd learn, demand blood to settle. Stay with me until the end of this story and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far Anna and Caleb's journey travels across this world. The wind carried dust and the scent of coming snow across the Wyoming territory that November morning in 1877. Caleb Merrick stood on the porch of his timber frame house, coffee growing cold in his tin cup, watching the horizon like it might offer answers to questions he hadn't yet formed. The ranch stretched out before him, 200 acres of stubborn grassland, a barn that leaned slightly east, and enough loneliness to fill both. 3 years since Margaret died. 3 years since he'd buried her and their stillborn son on the hill overlooking the creek. 3 years of silence so thick it pressed against his eardrums like water. He was 34 years old and felt ancient. The house behind him was clean but lifeless. Margaret's touch had faded from the curtains, the carefully arranged dried flowers, the way the dishes had once been stacked just so. Now everything was functional. Survival, not living. He cooked what he needed, cleaned what he must, and filled the hours between dawn and dusk with work that kept his hands busy and his mind blessedly blank. But nights were different. Nights, the silence became a living thing that wrapped around his throat. He'd lie in bed staring at the ceiling beams, counting knots in the wood, listening to the house settle, and wondering if this was all there was left. A slow fade into irrelevance, dying alone in a house that had once held so much promise. It was old Pete Samuels, the mail carrier who came through every third Thursday, who'd first suggested it. "You're too young to be living like a hermit, Caleb," Pete had said 6 months back, dumping a small pile of catalogs and letters on the porch. "There's outfits now, services that connect men out here with women back east looking for new starts. Respectable thing, mail-order matches, nothing shameful about it." Caleb had grunted non-committally, but Pete had left a newspaper advertisement anyway. Western Matrimonial Agency, connecting honest men with virtuous women. Seeking Western opportunity. For 3 months, that advertisement had sat in his desk drawer, gathering dust and doubt. What kind of man advertised for a wife like she was a plow horse? What kind of woman answered such an advertisement? But the silence kept pressing, and one whiskey-blurred night, he'd written out a simple notice. Homesteader 34, Wyoming Territory. Land, house, livestock. Seeking wife for partnership. No illusions offered. Hard work, honest treatment, and a place to call home. Write to Caleb Merrick, care of Merrick Ranch, Salvation Creek, Wyoming Territory. He'd paid the $5 fee, sent it off, and immediately regretted it. But the letters came anyway. 7 of them over 2 months. Most were what he'd expected. Flowery language from women describing themselves in terms that sounded copied from dime novels. Accomplished in the domestic arts. Of cheerful disposition and pleasing countenance. Seeking a God-fearing man to build a Christian home. They felt rehearsed, like audition pieces, and he couldn't bring himself to answer any of them. The 8th letter was different. It had arrived 3 weeks ago, in an envelope so plain it might have contained a bill. The handwriting was neat, almost mechanical in its precision, letters formed with the kind of care that suggested the writer had been taught penmanship as a matter of survival, not elegance. "Mr. Merrick, I am responding to your notice in the Western Matrimonial Register. I am 26 years old, of sound health and sober habits. I can cook, clean, mend, and manage household accounts. I am not accomplished in the decorative arts. I do not sing or play instruments. I have no family to speak of. I ask only for a place to live in exchange for my labor. I expect nothing beyond basic provision and respectful treatment. I will not be a burden. If these terms are acceptable, I can arrive by the 1st of November. Respectfully, Anna Brooks." There was no mention of beauty or charm, no false promises of domestic bliss, no talk of building a future together or finding happiness. Just a transaction, stark and honest. A woman offering labor for shelter, like she was applying for a ranch hand position rather than a marriage. Something about that brutal honesty had reached through his numbness. This wasn't a woman looking for romance. This was someone who'd learned to negotiate survival with the precision of a contract. This was someone who understood that life dealt hard hands, and pretty words didn't change the cards. He'd written back the same day. Miss Brooks, your terms are acceptable. I have a 4-room house, clean and weatherproof. You'll have your own space until or unless you choose otherwise. The work is hard, but no harder than any frontier life. I won't mistreat you, and I won't demand what you're not willing to give. The stage runs through Salvation Creek on the first Thursday of each month. Send word of your arrival date, and I'll meet you. Caleb Merrick. Her response had come quickly. One line. I will arrive November 1st. Thank you. No excitement, no anxiety. Just confirmation, like she was confirming a supply order. That had been 3 weeks ago. Now November 1st had arrived with frost on the grass and clouds building over the mountains, and Caleb found himself riding into Salvation Creek with a knot in his stomach he couldn't quite name. Salvation Creek wasn't much of a town. A main street with a general store, a saloon, a boarding house, a church, and a handful of other structures that served the scattered ranchers and homesteaders. But it was the end of the stage line, the last stop before the truly wild country began. Caleb tied his horse outside Gunderson's general store and nodded to the handful of men loitering on the porch. Walt Gunderson himself, a broad-shouldered Swede with a beard like steel wool, leaned against the post. Heard you got a bride coming in today, Merrick, Walt said, not unkindly. That true? Might be, Caleb said. Good for you. House that size needs a woman's touch. Walt glanced toward the eastern road. Stage is running about an hour late. Weather coming in, probably. Caleb nodded and stepped inside to buy coffee he didn't need, just to have something to do with his hands. The store smelled of tobacco, leather, and the sharp tang of pickled goods. Mrs. Gunderson, a tiny woman with suspicious eyes, watched him from behind the counter. A mail-order bride, she said, voice flat. That's what folks are saying. That's right. You don't know anything about her? I know enough. You know nothing, Mrs. Gunderson said, wrapping his coffee with sharp, precise movements. Could be anyone. Could be running from something. Could be trouble. Could be a lot of things, Caleb agreed, paying and tucking the package under his arm. Appreciate your concern, ma'am. He stepped back outside just as the distant rumble of wheels and hoofbeats echoed down the canyon road. The stage was coming. Walt straightened. Others emerged from the saloon and the boarding house. The arrival of the stage was always an event in Salvation Creek. News, supplies, and occasionally new lives beginning. The coach rolled into view, a mud-spattered Concorde drawn by 6 tired horses. The driver, a leather-faced man named Jessup, hauled back on the reins and brought the team to a stamping halt in front of the store. Dust billowed and settled. Mail and freight, Jessup called, climbing down stiffly, and 1 passenger for Salvation Creek. The coach door opened. For a moment, no one emerged. Then a hand appeared. Thin, pale fingers gripping the door frame with white-knuckled tension. A woman stepped down. Caleb's first impression was of someone who'd been carved from winter itself. She was thin, not delicately so, but in a way that spoke of not quite enough food for too long. Her dress was gray, practical, and clean, but had been mended so many times the original fabric was hard to distinguish from the patches. A bonnet covered most of her hair, though a few strands of dark brown escaped around a face that might have been pretty if it weren't so carefully blank. But it was her eyes that struck him. Gray-blue, like ice over deep water, and utterly still. Not calm, still. The kind of stillness prey animals adopted when a predator was near, hoping invisibility might save them. She stood beside the coach, 1 small carpet bag clutched in both hands, and swept her gaze across the gathered crowd with the wariness of someone expecting violence from any quarter. Walt whispered, "Rode hard and put away wet, that one." Caleb shot him a look that could have stripped paint, then stepped forward. "Miss Brooks?" Her eyes snapped to him, and for just a heartbeat, something flickered there. Assessment, calculation, fear, before the stillness returned. "Mr. Merrick." Her voice was quiet but clear, with a slight accent he couldn't quite place. Southern, maybe, or border state. Yes, ma'am. Welcome to Salvation Creek. He gestured toward his horse. Ranch is about 5 miles out. It's an easy ride if you're comfortable on horseback, or we can rent a wagon from Gunderson. Horseback is fine. He nodded and turned to arrange for a mount, but when he glanced back, she was standing in exactly the same position, bag clutched tight, body rigid as a fence post. Miss Brooks? This way. She moved then, but strangely, each step deliberate, measured, like she was crossing ice that might break. The men on the porch watched her with the kind of interest frontier towns reserved for oddities, and Caleb saw her register each stare, saw her shoulders draw in infinitesimally tighter. Walt had a docile mare he rented out for occasions like this. Caleb led the horse over and started to offer his hand to help her mount, but she flinched, actually jerked backward as if he'd raised a fist. He froze, hand still extended. I'm not going to hurt you. I know, she said, but her voice was thin, like she was reciting something she didn't quite believe. I apologize. I can manage. She mounted awkwardly but competently, settling into the saddle with the posture of someone who'd ridden before, but not recently or comfortably. Caleb swung up onto his own horse, tipped his hat to Walt, and led them out of town at an easy walk. The silence between them stretched like a physical thing. Caleb had never been much for small talk, but this felt different. Not comfortable quiet, but a void where conversation should be. He tried anyway. Storm's coming, he said, nodding toward the darkening sky. We'll get back before it hits, though. House is weatherproof. You'll be comfortable enough. Thank you. Ranch is nothing fancy, but it's solid. 200 acres, about 40 head of cattle, some chickens, a milk cow. I do most of the work myself, but I hire help for roundup and branding. I see. He glanced over. She was sitting perfectly straight, eyes fixed ahead, hands light on the reins. Everything about her posture said control, like she was holding herself together through sheer force of will. It gets quiet out here, he continued, feeling increasingly foolish but unable to stop. Nearest neighbor is the Hendersons, about 7 miles south. Towns where we just were. Church service once a month when the circuit preacher comes through. That's fine. I'm not expecting... He paused, choosing words carefully. I meant what I said in my letter. You'll have your own room, your own space. I won't push for anything you're not ready to give. This arrangement can be whatever works for both of us. She turned to look at him then, really look at him, and in her eyes he saw something that made his chest tighten. Not fear exactly, but a bone-deep weariness, like someone who'd stopped believing in kindness because experience had taught her better. Why did you answer my letter? She asked quietly. The question caught him off guard. Because it was honest. You didn't dress it up or pretend it was something it wasn't. You just laid out terms, plain and simple. I appreciated that. Most men want more than labor. I expect some do. I'm not most men. What are you then? He thought about that as they rode, the only sounds the creak of leather and the soft thud of hooves on packed earth. I'm a man whose wife died 3 years back, who's been living in a house that's become more of a tomb than a home, who figured maybe having another person around might make the silence a little less heavy. But I've got no illusions, Miss Brooks. I'm not looking for romance or passion or anything you see in storybooks. I'm just tired of being alone. Something shifted in her expression. Not softening, exactly, but recognition. Like he'd spoken a language she understood. Then we're both looking for the same thing, she said. A place to stop running. The words hung in the air between them, loaded with meaning he didn't yet understand. But he nodded anyway, and they rode the rest of the way in silence that felt, if not comfortable, then at least honest. The Merrick Ranch appeared over a rise. Timber house with a stone chimney, barn, and outbuildings arranged in a rough square, all of it backed by the rising slope of foothills that led up to the mountains. Smoke rose from the chimney. Caleb had banked the fire before leaving. This is it, he said, perhaps unnecessarily. Anna. He realized he'd started thinking of her by her first name without meaning to, studied the property with the same careful assessment she'd given everything else. It's substantial. My father and I built most of it. He passed 6 years ago, left me the land. Margaret and I... He stopped. unsure why he was telling her this. My late wife and I made it what it is now. She nodded, asking nothing more, and he was grateful for that. He helped her dismount, or rather, moved into position to help, and she carefully maneuvered to avoid his touch while still getting down safely. They stood in the yard, the wind picking up as the storm clouds rolled closer. I'll show you inside, he said. Get you settled before the weather turns. The house was warm, the fire he'd built that morning still glowing. He'd cleaned obsessively the last few days, wanting to make a good impression, but unsure what that even meant. Now, seeing it through her eyes, he noticed how spare it was. Functional furniture, bare walls except for a single photograph of his parents, curtains that were practical rather than decorative. 4 rooms, he said, leading her through. Front room here, kitchen through that door, 2 bedrooms. You can have the far one. It's got a good window, catches the morning sun. Door locks from the inside. She stopped, turned to look at him. You thought about that. The lock. Seemed important. For the first time, something flickered across her face that might have been the ghost of gratitude. Thank you. He showed her the bedroom, simple but clean, with a real bed frame and mattress, a chest of drawers, a washstand, and that eastern-facing window. Anna set her carpet bag down carefully, like it contained something precious, and ran one hand along the quilt covering the bed. This is more than I expected, she said softly. It's not much, but... No. She cut him off, still not looking at him. It's more than I expected. Thank you, Mr. Merrick. Caleb. You can call me Caleb. Caleb. She tested the name, then nodded. And you may call me Anna. Anna. He backed toward the door, suddenly feeling like an intruder in his own house. I'll, leave you to settle in. Kitchen's stocked if you're hungry, and I've got work to do in the barn, but I'll be back before supper. We can sort out arrangements then, how things will work. All right. He was halfway through the door when her voice stopped him. Caleb? Yes? If I'm to work for my keep, you should tell me what you need done. I'm not afraid of work. There was something in the way she said it, work, that made him think she was claiming familiar ground, something she could understand and control when everything else was uncertain. Tomorrow's soon enough for that, he said. Today, just settle in. Get your bearings. He left before she could protest, pulling the door closed behind him and standing in the front room for a long moment, trying to understand what he'd just brought into his life. Through the window, he could see the first snowflakes beginning to fall, fat and lazy in the late afternoon light. The storm was coming in gentle for now. But something told him that the real storm, the one carried in a thin woman's eyes and hidden beneath long sleeves, was already here. Caleb spent the next 2 hours in the barn, mucking stalls and checking supplies with more attention than either task required. The truth was, he didn't know how to be around her, didn't know what to say, what to do, where to look. The silence between them felt different than his solitary silence, heavier, charged with unspoken things. By the time he returned to the house, full dark had fallen and the snow was coming down in earnest. Light glowed warm from the windows, and he could smell food cooking. He stomped snow from his boots and stepped inside. The front room had been transformed subtly, not rearranged, but tidied in ways he hadn't managed. Books on the shelf straightened, his coffee cup from that morning washed and put away. The ash swept from around the fireplace. The fire itself burned brighter, newly fed. In the kitchen, Anna stood at the stove, her back to him, stirring something in a pot. She'd removed her bonnet, revealing dark hair pulled back in a tight bun, and rolled up her sleeves to work. That's when he saw them, scars. Faint white lines across her forearms, some straight, some curved, some barely visible and others more pronounced. Too many to be accidents, too regular to be anything but deliberate. His hands clenched involuntarily. Anna must have heard him or sensed his presence because she turned, saw where he was looking, and immediately pulled her sleeves down with movements so practiced they were nearly unconscious. Supper will be ready shortly, she said, voice carefully neutral. I found cornmeal and bacon. I made a simple corn pudding. I hope that's acceptable. Caleb forced himself to unclench his fists, to breathe, to not demand answers to questions he had no right to ask. That's fine. Thank you. They ate at the kitchen table, plates filled with surprisingly good food. She hadn't exaggerated her cooking skills. But the silence was suffocating now, weighted with what he'd seen and what she knew he'd seen. Finally, Caleb set down his fork. Anna, I'm going to ask you one question, and then I'll leave it be unless you want to talk about it. All right? She went very still, fork suspended halfway to her mouth. All right. Are you running from someone? Someone who might come looking for you? The question hung there. Anna slowly set down her fork, folded her hands in her lap, and met his eyes with that disconcerting stillness. Not yet, she said, but I might be. Someday. That's not a no. No, it's not. He absorbed that, turning it over in his mind. If someone comes, I need to know. Can't protect you if I don't know what I'm protecting you from. I don't need protection. I need obscurity. Her voice was calm, almost clinical. I need to be someone no one's looking for, in a place no one would think to look. And if that's not enough? She met his eyes. Then I'll handle it. This isn't your burden, Caleb. I won't let it become yours. A little late for that, he said. You're here now. That makes it my business. I signed no papers. I can leave. That's not... He stopped, frustrated by his inability to articulate what he meant. I'm not trying to trap you or claim some kind of ownership. I'm just saying that if trouble comes, you don't have to face it alone. That's all. She studied him for a long moment, and he had the unsettling sense of being evaluated, measured against some internal standard he couldn't see. Whatever she found must have been acceptable, because she nodded slightly. Thank you, she said, but I hope it won't be necessary. They finished eating in renewed silence, but it felt fractionally less oppressive. Anna washed the dishes, refusing his offer to help with a firm, I need to know where things go, and excused herself to her room shortly after. Caleb sat by the fire, listening to the wind howl outside and the soft sounds of movement from the far bedroom. He thought about scars and silence, about the way she'd flinched from his hand, about the careful blankness of her expression that occasionally cracked just enough to show the exhaustion underneath. What happened to you? He wanted to ask. Who hurt you? What did they do that left you so carefully defended, so ready to run? But he'd learned enough today to know that those answers, if they came at all, would come in her time, not his. For now, she was here. Safe, as far as he could tell. Sheltered from whatever storm she'd left behind. And if that storm ever found her here? Well, Caleb thought, feeding another log to the fire and watching sparks spiral up the chimney, he'd meant what he said. She wouldn't face it alone. Outside, the snow fell heavier, blanketing the Wyoming wilderness in white, covering tracks, erasing the past, at least temporarily. Inside, two damaged people settled into an uneasy coexistence, neither quite sure what they'd agreed to, but both desperately hoping it might be enough. The house creaked and settled around them. The fire burned low. And in the darkness of her locked room, Anna Brooks, if that was even her real name, lay awake, listening to the sounds of this new place, waiting for the inevitable moment when her past would come knocking. It always did, eventually. But maybe, just maybe, this time would be different. Maybe this time she'd found a place worth fighting for. The days that followed settled into a rhythm that was less partnership than careful choreography. Two people moving around each other with the precision of dancers who'd never actually touched. Anna rose before dawn, so early that Caleb would come downstairs to find breakfast already made, the kitchen cleaned and her outside feeding chickens, or hauling water as if rest were something she'd forgotten how to do. She worked with the intensity of someone proving their worth with every action, every completed task, another brick in a wall between herself and some unnamed threat. Caleb tried to slow her down that first week. You don't have to do everything in a day, he'd said, finding her scrubbing the front porch in freezing temperatures, her hands red and chapped. Pace yourself. This isn't a race. She'd looked up at him with those unnervingly still eyes. I'm earning my place. You have a place. You don't have to earn it every minute of every day. But she'd returned to scrubbing, and he'd learned that arguing was pointless. Whatever drove her went deeper than logic or reassurance could reach. By the second week, he'd started to notice the patterns. Anna tracked every door in the house, who opened it, when, and how. If he entered a room where she was working, her eyes would flick to the exit, calculating distance. She positioned herself so her back was never to a doorway if she could help it, and the few times he'd forgotten and come up behind her unexpectedly, she'd spun with such violent speed that he'd actually stepped back, hands raised. "Sorry," she'd say immediately, composing herself. "You startled me." "I'll make more noise," he'd promised, and started announcing himself before entering rooms, clearing his throat in hallways, making his footsteps deliberately heavy. It felt absurd, making noise in his own home, but the alternative, seeing that flash of terror in her eyes, was worse. She slept strangely too. He'd wake in the night sometimes and hear her moving around, soft footsteps in her room at hours when normal people were long asleep. Once, around 3 in the morning, he'd gotten up for water and found her sitting in the front room, fully dressed, staring at the dying embers of the fire with eyes that weren't quite focused on the present. "Can't sleep?" he'd asked quietly. She'd blinked, coming back to herself. "I didn't mean to disturb you." "You didn't, just... You okay?" "Yes, just old habits. I'll go back to bed." But he'd seen the exhaustion carved into her face, the kind of tiredness that had nothing to do with physical work and everything to do with a mind that wouldn't stop running, wouldn't stop watching for danger. The third week brought the first real crack in her careful defenses. It was a Tuesday morning, bitterly cold, with ice forming in elaborate patterns on the windows. Caleb had gone out to break ice on the water troughs and check the livestock. The work was routine, mindless, and he was thinking about nothing in particular when he heard the chickens making a commotion. He walked around the barn to find Anna standing in the chicken yard, completely motionless, her back to him. The hens were clustered at the far end, agitated, but Anna wasn't moving to feed them or collect eggs. She was just standing there, swaying slightly, her breath coming in visible puffs in the cold air. "Anna?" He moved closer, careful to make noise. "You all right?" She didn't respond, didn't even acknowledge his presence. He circled around to see her face and felt ice that had nothing to do with temperature slide down his spine. Her eyes were open but unseeing, fixed on something that wasn't there. Her face had gone chalk white, and she was trembling, not from cold but from something internal, something that had pulled her out of the present and trapped her somewhere else entirely. "Anna." He kept his voice calm, steady. "Anna, can you hear me?" Nothing. She swayed again, and he realized she was barefoot. No coat despite the freezing temperature, her feet already turning blue against the snow-dusted ground. "Jesus," he muttered, and made a decision. "I'm going to touch you now. I'm going to help you inside. I won't hurt you." He moved slowly, telegraphing every motion, and carefully put one arm around her shoulders. She didn't resist, didn't react at all, just let him guide her like a sleepwalker. Her skin was ice cold, her body rigid with whatever memory had seized her. He got her inside, sat her in the chair closest to the fire, and wrapped 2 blankets around her. Then he knelt and carefully took one of her frozen feet in his hands, trying to warm it. The touch seemed to break through whatever had held her because she suddenly gasped, her whole body jerking as if coming back from a great distance. "No, don't. I can—" She tried to pull away, but he held her foot gently, firmly. "Your feet are frozen," he said. "Just sit still. Let me warm them up before you get frostbite." "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. I don't know what—" Her voice fractured, and he looked up to see tears streaming down her face, the first emotion beyond careful control he'd seen from her. "It's okay. You don't have to explain. I was feeding the chickens, and then I was somewhere else. I don't... It happens sometimes. I'm sorry." He rubbed her feet carefully, methodically, trying to restore circulation. "How often is sometimes?" She was quiet for a long moment. "More often lately, since I came here." "Why?" "Because..." She stopped, seemed to struggle with words. "Because, for the first time in years, I'm not in immediate danger. And when you're not running anymore, all the things you ran from catch up." He absorbed that, continuing to work on her feet until the color started to return. When he was satisfied she wouldn't lose any toes, he stood and poured hot coffee, pressed the cup into her hands. "Drink this. Slowly." She obeyed, hands shaking so badly the cup rattled against her teeth. They sat in silence for several minutes, the fire crackling, the wind howling outside. Finally, she set down the half-empty cup and looked at him with eyes that were no longer blank but filled with something worse. Shame. "You should send me away," she said quietly. I'm not well. I'm broken, and I can't be fixed, and you deserve better than a wife who freezes in chicken yards and can't sleep through the night without checking all the locks twice. Is that what you think? That you're broken? I know what I am. Caleb sat back, choosing his words carefully. My father fought in the Mexican War, came back with a scar across his chest where a bayonet nearly killed him. That scar pulled tight in cold weather, pained him for the rest of his life. But he wasn't broken. He was wounded. There's a difference. Wounds heal. Some do, some don't, not completely, but they become part of you, part of your story. Doesn't make you broken. Just makes you someone who survived something. She looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Disbelief mixed with desperate hope, like someone who'd been told they might fly but didn't trust the promise. You don't know what I survived. No, he agreed. I don't. But I saw those scars on your arms, Anna, and I've seen the way you watch doors, the way you flinch before I even move, the way you work yourself to exhaustion like you're afraid if you stop, something will catch you. Her breath caught. Caleb, I'm not asking you to tell me, he said. I'm just telling you that whatever it was, whatever was done to you, that's not who you are. That's what happened to you. And you don't have to earn the right to be here. You're here because I asked you to be, and you can stay as long as you want. Frozen feet, bad dreams, and all. She stared at him for a long moment, then did something that surprised them both. She laughed. It was a broken, rusty sound, like machinery that hadn't been used in years, but it was genuine. You're either very kind or very stupid, she said. Probably both, he admitted, and was rewarded with another small laugh. That night, she came to dinner instead of eating alone in her room as she usually did. They didn't talk much, but the silence felt different, less like two strangers avoiding conversation, and more like two people comfortable enough not to fill every moment with words. After she'd gone to bed, Caleb sat by the fire and thought about what she'd said, about not running anymore, about the past catching up when you finally stopped moving. He wondered what she was running from, what ghosts chased her through her dreams, what memories could pull her out of the present and leave her frozen and unseen. He wondered, too, what kind of strength it took to keep running for years, and what kind of courage it took to finally stop. Whatever her story was, he thought, it was one of survival. And if she'd survived this long carrying whatever weight she carried, then maybe, just maybe, she was stronger than she knew. The fourth week, winter settled in hard. Snow came in waves, sometimes gentle, sometimes violent, and the work of keeping the ranch running became a battle against the elements. Caleb spent long days breaking ice, feeding livestock, and making sure everything that needed to stay alive made it through the cold. Anna worked beside him more and more. She'd appear without being asked, helping him carry feed, mucking stalls. Her thin frame belied surprising strength. She was, he discovered, good with animals, patient and gentle in a way she never was with herself. The horses, skittish at first, learned to trust her. Even his bad-tempered bull would let her approach when he'd charge at anyone else. You have a way with them, he said one afternoon, watching her calm a spooked mare with nothing but a soft voice and steady hands. Animals don't lie, she said simply. They don't pretend to be kind and then hurt you. If they're going to bite, they show their teeth first. It makes them easier to trust. The comment hung in the air, revealing more than she probably intended, and Caleb filed it away with all the other small pieces of her story she dropped without meaning to. It was in the fifth week that everything changed. Caleb had gone into town for supplies, leaving Anna alone at the ranch, something he'd been careful not to do before. But the pantry was running dangerously low, and the weather had cleared enough to make the trip feasible. She'd assured him she'd be fine, had even seemed pleased at the prospect of time alone. I can clean the root cellar, she'd said, organize the preserves. I've been meaning to. He'd left her that morning with instructions to stay inside if the weather turned, and headed for Salvation Creek with a pack mule and a list of necessities. The trip should have taken 3 hours round trip. It took 5 because Walt Gunderson insisted on talking his ear off about some dispute with a rancher to the south, and by the time Caleb finally extracted himself and headed home, the sun was setting and his worry was rising. He shouldn't have left her alone so long. Shouldn't have left her alone at all, really, not when she was still so clearly haunted by whatever she'd run from. The worry gnawed at him as he urged his horse faster, the mule protesting the pace. The ranch appeared over the rise just as full dark fell. Smoke rose from the chimney. Good. She'd kept the fire going. But something felt wrong. The door stood slightly ajar despite the cold, and there were no lights in the windows. Caleb's heart kicked against his ribs. He slid off his horse and approached quietly, every sense alert. Anna? No response. He pushed the door open wider, and his hand instinctively went to the rifle he kept by the entrance. The front room was a disaster. The table lay on its side, a chair broken, papers and books scattered across the floor, signs of struggle or panic. Anna! He moved through the house quickly, checking rooms. Kitchen, empty but undisturbed. His bedroom, untouched. Her bedroom door, closed. He knocked. Anna, it's Caleb. I'm home. Are you in there? Silence. Then so quietly he almost missed it. Stay out. Relief and concern warred in his chest. She was alive, but something was very wrong. I'm not coming in. I just need to know you're not hurt. I'm not hurt. What happened? The front room looks like... I said stay out! Her voice rose, sharp with something that might have been panic or fury or both. Please, just give me time. I'll clean it up. I'll fix everything. Just don't come in. He stood outside her door, weighing options. Push and violate the only privacy she had? Or wait and hope she'd come out on her own terms? All right, he said finally. I'm here if you need me. I'm not going anywhere. He returned to the front room and set about righting furniture, picking up scattered items, trying to piece together what had happened. Nothing seemed stolen or deliberately destroyed. It looked more like someone had torn through the space in a frenzy, looking for something or running from something. An hour passed. 2. He made coffee, kept the fire fed, and waited with patience born of hunting. Sometimes the best thing you could do was stay still and let prey come to you. Not that he thought of Anna as prey, but the principle held. Push too hard, and she'd bolt. Finally, near midnight, her door opened. She emerged slowly, and even in the dim firelight he could see she'd been crying, eyes red and swollen, face blotched. But more than that, she looked exhausted in a way that went beyond physical tiredness. She looked defeated. I'm sorry, she said, voice hoarse. I'll clean it up. I'll replace the chair. I don't know what... I didn't mean to... What happened? He kept his voice neutral, non-threatening. She wrapped her arms around herself, that protective gesture he'd come to recognize. I was working in the root cellar. It's dark down there, and close, and I thought I heard something. Footsteps. I know it was probably just the house settling or an animal outside, but I heard footsteps and I was back in... She stopped, breathing hard. I panicked. I ran up here and I couldn't remember where I was. I thought I was trapped. I had to get out, but the door wouldn't open right. I'd locked it. I'd locked it from the inside, but I couldn't remember doing it, and I broke. She gestured helplessly at the chaos. By the time I remembered where I was, remembered that I was safe, it was already done. I'm sorry. I know you didn't sign up for this. For someone who destroys your home because she can't tell the difference between then and now. Caleb stood and walked over to her, slow and careful. Look at me. She did, reluctantly. You didn't destroy anything that can't be fixed. A chair broke. Papers got scattered. That's all. Nothing important. I broke your trust. No, he interrupted firmly. You had a bad moment. That's different. And you're telling me about it now, which means you trust me enough to be honest. That's more than nothing. Her eyes filled with tears again. Why are you being so kind? You should be angry. You should send me away. Why would I do that? Because I'm damaged. Her voice broke. Because I'm not who you thought you were getting. I'm not some respectable woman down on her luck. I'm someone who's so broken she can't even make it through a day without falling apart. Who carries so much fear that the sound of footsteps sends her into a panic. Who survived something terrible, Caleb finished quietly. Something bad enough that it's still hunting you. And you know what that tells me? That you're strong. Because you're still here, still fighting, still trying. That's not strength, that's just not dying yet. Sometimes that's the same thing. She stared at him, tears streaming freely now, and something in her seemed to crack open. I'm so tired, Caleb. I'm so tired of being afraid all the time. Tired of jumping at shadows, tired of not being able to sleep, not being able to trust, not being able to just be. I thought if I ran far enough, if I found someplace quiet enough, maybe it would stop. Maybe I could stop. But it just follows me. Without thinking, he reached out and touched her shoulder, just a brief, gentle contact. She flinched but didn't pull away. Then maybe it's time to stop running and start standing. Can't fight what's behind you if you're always looking over your shoulder. But if you turn and face it, it'll destroy me. Or you'll destroy it. She laughed bitterly. You don't understand what you're saying. You don't know what I'm facing. Then tell me. The words hung between them, an offer and a challenge both. Anna looked at him for a long moment, and he could see her weighing it, the risk of revelation against the burden of silence. Not tonight, she whispered finally. I can't. Not tonight, but soon. I promise, you deserve to know what you've brought into your home. I brought you into my home, he corrected gently. Whatever else comes with you, we'll handle it. She nodded slowly, then looked around at the chaos she'd created. I should clean this up. Tomorrow, tonight, you should rest. I don't think I can. Then we'll sit up together, he said simply. Keep each other company while the night passes. And they did. They sat by the fire as midnight turned to early morning, not talking much, but sharing the weight of wakefulness. At some point, Anna's head drooped against the back of the chair, and she fell into what looked like actual sleep. Not the restless half-consciousness he'd seen before, but real rest. Caleb stayed awake, feeding the fire, and thought about broken things and the possibility of healing. He thought about how trauma didn't announce itself with trumpets and fanfare, but hid in footsteps that sounded like threats, in shadows that looked like monsters, in the terrible space between past and present where the wounded lived. He thought about the scars on her arms and wondered what other scars she carried, the ones that didn't show on skin but lived deeper, in the places that made a person who they were. And he made himself a promise. Whatever darkness had touched Anna, whatever had left her so afraid and so strong at the same time, he would help her face it. Not because he owed her anything, but because in her fierce, wounded survival, he recognized something of himself, the part that had kept moving after Margaret died, kept working, kept living, even when living felt like too much effort. They were both wounded, both survivors, both trying to figure out what came after the surviving part. Maybe, he thought, as dawn began to pale the windows, maybe they could figure it out together. Morning came soft and gray, winter light filtering through frost-etched windows. Caleb woke stiff in his chair, neck protesting the awkward angle he'd slept in, and realized Anna was no longer across from him. For a moment, panic seized him. Had she run during the night? But then he heard sounds from the kitchen. The clatter of pans, the crackle of a fire being stoked, the mundane music of breakfast being prepared. He stood, working the kinks out of his spine, and found her at the stove, already dressed, hair pinned back with that same severe precision. She'd cleaned the front room while he slept. The broken chair sat by the door, pieces stacked neatly for repair or burning. Everything else had been restored to order with the kind of thoroughness that spoke of penance. You should have woken me, he said. Could have helped? You needed rest. She didn't turn from the stove. I made oatmeal and coffee. They ate in silence, but it was different now. Something had shifted in the darkness. Some wall between them made fractionally more permeable. She didn't meet his eyes, but she didn't hide either, and that felt like progress of a sort. After breakfast, Caleb went out to tend livestock, and when he returned hours later, he found Anna sitting at the kitchen table with paper and a pencil, writing something with fierce concentration. She looked up as he entered, and he saw she'd been crying again, eyes red-rimmed but dry now, face composed. I'm trying to write it down, she said without preamble. What I promised to tell you. I thought maybe it would be easier written than spoken, but... She gestured helplessly at the paper, which was covered in crossed-out lines and false starts. I don't know how to begin. How do you explain how you became someone you never wanted to be? Caleb pulled out a chair and sat across from her. Start anywhere. Start with your real name, if Anna Brooks isn't it. She flinched, but nodded. Anna is real. Anna Marie Carter. Brooks was... I took it from a grave marker I saw in a cemetery outside Cheyenne. A girl who died at 3 years old. I figured she wouldn't mind lending me her name if it helped me disappear. Where are you from? Originally? Kansas? Little town called Millbrook, south of Lawrence. My father was a teacher. My mother died when I was 12. It was just the two of us until... She stopped, swallowed hard. Until I was 17. There was a man, James Dutton, who ran a store in town. Respected, wealthy. He asked to court me, and my father was pleased. Thought it would be a good match. Her fingers twisted the pencil, knuckles white. I didn't want to. There was something about him that felt wrong, the way he looked at me like I was a horse he was considering purchasing. But I was 17 and taught to be obedient, so I didn't refuse. For 6 months he courted me properly, flowers, Sunday dinners, walks where people could see us. And then one night he invited me to see the new inventory at his store after hours. My father thought nothing of it. Why would he? Mr. Dutton was respectable. Caleb felt his jaw tighten, already knowing where this was heading, already feeling the rage start to build. He locked the door behind me, Anna continued, her voice going flat, clinical. I realized too late what kind of inventory he wanted to show me. I fought. I screamed. He hit me hard enough that I don't remember much after that, just waking up in a wagon, hands tied, head pounding. When I asked where we were going, he said I'd signed a contract, that I'd agreed to work off a debt. What debt? You were a child. My father's debt. Apparently Mr. Dutton had been loaning him money for months, keeping the school running. The contract he showed me, showed everyone, had my signature on it. I'd never seen it before in my life, but it looked real enough that no one questioned it. Her voice cracked slightly. My father believed him. Believed I'd signed something behind his back, that I'd gotten in over my head. He died thinking I'd betrayed him, embarrassed him. I never got to tell him the truth. Jesus Christ. The words came out harsh, and Anna glanced up sharply. There's more. That's just how it started. I'm listening. She took a shaky breath and continued. Dutton took me south. Kept me drugged most of the way so I wouldn't know the route or cause trouble. When I finally woke up clear-headed, we were in New Orleans. I'd heard of New Orleans, the music, the culture, the beautiful buildings, but Dutton didn't take me to see any of that. He took me to a house on Dauphine Street. Her hands were shaking now, but her voice stayed level, each word carefully measured. From the outside, it looked elegant. 3 stories, wrought iron balconies, gas lamps. Inside it was... She paused, searching for words. A factory. That's what I came to think of it as. A factory where girls were the product. Caleb's hands clenched under the table. He wanted to tell her to stop, that she didn't have to relive this. But he also knew that some stories needed telling, needed to be dragged into light, so they'd stop festering in darkness. There were 15 of us, Anna said. Some bought like me, some sold by their families, some just taken. The youngest was 13. The oldest was maybe 25, but looked 50. We were given new names. I became Lily, and taught that our only value was in pleasing men. If we pleased them, we ate. If we didn't... She gestured vaguely at her arms, at the scars Caleb had seen. The Madame Laveau, she was creative with punishments, said scars taught better lessons than words. How long? Caleb forced the question through a throat tight with fury. 7 years. I was 17 when I arrived, 24 when I finally escaped. How did you survive that? Anna's laugh was bitter. You do what you have to do. You split yourself in 2. The girl you were stays locked away somewhere safe inside, and you send out a different person to do what needs doing. Lily did what was required. Anna stayed hidden, stayed alive, and waited for a chance. She fell silent for a moment, staring at nothing. Caleb waited, giving her space to find the next words. There was a fire, she finally said. 2 years ago, winter of 1875. Started in the kitchen, spread fast. In the chaos, with everyone running and screaming, I just walked out the front door, walked down Dauphine Street in a borrowed dress and stolen shoes, and kept walking until I reached the docks. I worked my way north on riverboats, cleaning, cooking, doing whatever labor would get me another mile away. It took me nearly 2 years to get out of the South, to get to a place where I thought I might be far enough away that they'd stop looking. Who's they? Madame Laveau died in the fire. But the house belonged to a consortium. Businessmen, politicians, people with money and power who had investments to protect. And there's one man in particular. She stopped, and for the first time since she'd started talking, real fear flickered across her face. Samuel Borel. He was Madame Laveau's silent partner, owned half the house. He'd visit sometimes, and when he did, you prayed he wouldn't pick you. He was worse than the others because he enjoyed the fear, fed on it. Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. The last time he visited, a month before the fire, he chose me. And when he was done, he pressed his thumb into my neck hard enough to leave a bruise that lasted weeks. Said he was marking his property. Said if I ever tried to leave, he'd find me and make sure I regretted it for whatever short, painful life I had left. She pulled her collar aside slightly, and even in the dim kitchen light, Caleb could see the faint, shadowy mark, a thumbprint-sized discoloration that had never fully faded. So you've been running from him. From all of them. But yes, mostly from him, because he's the type of man who doesn't let things go, who considers it a personal insult when his property misbehaves. She looked at Caleb directly now, eyes blazing with something fierce despite the tears tracking down her cheeks. That's what I am, Caleb. That's what I was. Property, a commodity, a thing bought and sold and used up, and I know what you're thinking. You don't know what I'm thinking. You're thinking you made a mistake, that you invited something ruined into your home, someone who can never be a real wife, who's too damaged to be anything but a burden. Stop. The word came out harder than he intended, and Anna flinched. He softened his tone. That's not what I'm thinking. Not even close. Then what? He took a moment to gather his thoughts, to find words adequate to the rage and sorrow warring inside him. I'm thinking that what was done to you, being kidnapped, sold, kept against your will, brutalized for 7 years, that's not who you are. That's what happened to you. There's a difference. Is there? Her voice was raw. Because I can't tell anymore. I don't know where the girl I was ends and the woman they made me begins. I don't know if Anna even exists anymore or if she died somewhere along the way and left just this. Just Lily, pretending to be human. You're Anna, Caleb said firmly. You're sitting here telling me the truth, even though it terrifies you. You're working yourself half to death trying to prove your worth. You're waking up every morning and choosing to keep going even when everything in you probably wants to give up. That's Anna. That's who you are, not what they tried to make you. She shook her head. You don't understand. I'm broken in ways that don't heal. I can't. She stopped, face flushing. I can't be a wife to you. Not in the way you'd have a right to expect. The thought of anyone touching me, even gently, even with kindness, it makes my skin crawl. It sends me back to that house, to that room, to feeling like I'm being used up piece by piece. So if that's what you wanted, if that's why you answered my letter. That's not why I answered your letter, Caleb interrupted. I told you from the start, I'm not expecting anything beyond what you're willing to give. If that's companionship and nothing more, that's fine. If it's just having another person in the house so the silence isn't so damn oppressive, that's fine too. I'm not looking to use you, Anna. I'm just trying to give you a place to be safe. Why? The question burst from her with almost violent intensity. Why would you do that? You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. Why would you offer kindness to someone so obviously damaged? He thought about that, about Margaret and the son who'd never drawn breath, about the last 3 years of living in a tomb of his own making. Because maybe we're both damaged, just in different ways. And maybe that means we can understand each other better than whole people ever could. The silence stretched between them, heavy with everything said and unsaid. Finally, Anna spoke, her voice small and uncertain. What happens now? Now you stop carrying this alone. Now we figure out what comes next, together. And if this Borel bastard or anyone else comes looking for you, they'll find out real quick that you're not property anymore. You're a person, and you're under my protection. Caleb, you don't understand what you're saying. These aren't random criminals. They're connected, powerful. I don't care if they're the president himself. No one owns you, not anymore. Anna stared at him for a long moment, and something in her face shifted. Not quite hope, but maybe the possibility of hope, like someone who'd been lost in darkness so long they'd forgotten what light looked like. You really mean that? every word. She nodded slowly, then stood. I need some air. Need to think. Is that all right? Of course, just don't wander too far. Storm's coming in. She grabbed her coat and stepped outside, and through the window Caleb watched her walk toward the creek, her figure growing smaller against the vast white landscape. He sat at the table for a long time, staring at the paper she'd been writing on, at the crossed-out words and tear stains. A factory where girls were the product. 7 years. The casual cruelty of that statement, the matter-of-fact way she'd described her own dehumanization, made his stomach turn. And underneath the horror was a burning rage directed at men he'd never met. James Dutton, Samuel Borrell, all the nameless customers who'd used a 17-year-old girl and called it business. But beneath the rage was something else, a fierce, protective determination. Anna had survived hell and come out the other side still fighting, still trying, still capable of trust despite every reason not to be. That took a kind of strength Caleb could barely fathom. And if her past came looking for her here, it would have to go through him first. The storm rolled in that evening, heavy and violent, the kind of blizzard that turned the world white and erased the boundaries between earth and sky. Anna came back inside before it hit, snow dusting her hair and shoulders, and spent the evening in her room. Caleb didn't push, just made dinner and left a plate outside her door. Days passed. A week. 2. The weather kept them housebound, and in the forced proximity, something began to shift. Anna started talking more, small observations about weather or animals or the book she was reading. She'd join him for meals without being asked, and sometimes in the evenings they'd sit by the fire, her in the chair, him on the floor with his back to the sofa, and exist in a companionable silence that felt less like avoidance and more like comfort. She still startled easily, still woke with nightmares that left her pacing the house in the small hours, still checked and rechecked locks with obsessive regularity. But she was also teaching herself to cook his mother's recipes from a book she'd found, was learning to card wool with a focus that suggested she found the repetitive work soothing, was slowly, so slowly, beginning to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could stop running. It was late January when everything changed again. Caleb had ridden into Salvation Creek for supplies and to check for mail. Pete Samuels handed him the usual bundle, a catalog, a letter from his aunt in Denver, and an envelope with no return address. The handwriting was elegant, educated, and somehow sinister in its perfection. He opened it standing there in the general store and felt the bottom drop out of his world. The letter was brief and brutal. Mr. Merrick, it has come to my attention that you are harboring property belonging to certain business interests in New Orleans. The woman calling herself Anna Brooks is known to us as Lily, and her unauthorized departure from her contracted position represents a significant financial loss. I am authorized to offer you compensation for her return, $500, a generous sum for a mail-order bride of questionable virtue. Alternatively, you may refuse, in which case I will be forced to pursue legal remedies to recover what was stolen. I will arrive in Salvation Creek on February 10th to resolve this matter. I trust you will make the sensible choice. Respectfully, Samuel Borrell. New Orleans, Louisiana. Caleb read the letter 3 times, rage building with each pass. Property. Contracted position. Stolen. The language was careful, couched in business terms that made kidnapping and sexual slavery sound like a legitimate transaction. Bad news? Walt Gunderson asked, noticing his expression. Might be. Caleb folded the letter carefully, tucking it into his coat. Tell me something, Walt. If a man claimed to own another person, showed up with papers saying so, what would the law say? Walt frowned. Well, since the war ended, no one can own another person. That's federal law now. Why? Just curious, thanks for the mail. He rode home through gathering dusk, mind racing. February 10th was 2 weeks away. 2 weeks to prepare, to plan, to figure out how to protect Anna from a man who had money, connections, and apparently no compunction about traveling 1,500 miles to reclaim what he considered his property. When he got home, Anna was making bread, hands dusted with flour, and the domestic normalcy of the scene made what he had to tell her that much harder. She looked up as he entered, and her smile, small but genuine, a rare gift, faded as she saw his face. What happened? He set down the supplies and pulled out the letter. This came for me. You should read it. She took it with flour-dusted fingers, and he watched the color drain from her face as she read. Her hand started shaking halfway through, and by the time she finished, she'd gone deathly pale. He found me. Her voice was barely a whisper. I was so careful. I didn't use my real name, didn't leave a trail. How did he find me? Mail-order bride services aren't exactly secret, Caleb said grimly. He probably had people watching them, looking for women matching your description. Once you contacted me, it was just a matter of tracking the correspondence. Then I've put you in danger. I have to leave. Have to run before he gets here. You're not running. Caleb, you don't understand. This man, he's not going to just give up because you say no. He'll bring the law, bring hired guns, bring whatever it takes. And if you try to protect me, he'll destroy you too. I won't let that happen. He crossed the room and took her shoulders gently, waiting until she met his eyes. Listen to me. You're not running anymore. We're going to face this together. How? He has money, power, connections. What do we have? The truth, and the fact that slavery is illegal, no matter what fake papers he waves around. And something else. We have 2 weeks to get ready. 2 weeks to make sure when he arrives he finds out that you're not some helpless girl he can bully or buy. You're Anna Carter, and you're home. Tears spilled down her cheeks. This isn't my home. Isn't it? He held her gaze. Where else would you go that would feel more like home than here? She had no answer for that, and they stood in the kitchen as dusk deepened outside, the bread forgotten, both of them knowing that in 2 weeks the past was coming for them, with violence in its wake. But Caleb Merrick had meant every word. Anna wasn't running anymore. They would face this together, and Samuel Burrell would learn that some people couldn't be bought, and some debts were paid in ways that had nothing to do with money. The war Burrell thought he'd won 7 years ago was about to start again. And this time, Anna wouldn't be fighting alone. The 2 weeks that followed felt like standing on a cliff edge watching a storm roll in, inevitable, violent, and carrying the promise of destruction. Caleb spent the days preparing in ways both practical and legal, while Anna moved through the house like someone already saying goodbye to things she'd never really believed she could keep. Paperwork. Twice in 2 days. Must be serious. It is. Caleb laid Burrell's letter on the desk. I need to know where I stand, legally speaking. Bridger read the letter slowly, his expression darkening with each line. When he finished, he set it down with deliberate care and looked at Caleb with eyes that had seen too much cruelty to be surprised by more. This about your mail-order bride? Her name is Anna Carter, and yes, he's claiming she's property, contracted labor that broke contract. He's claiming she's a slave, Caleb corrected flatly. Dressing it up in business language doesn't change what it is. She was kidnapped at 17, taken to New Orleans, and held in a brothel for 7 years against her will. She escaped during a fire. That's not breaking a contract. That's survival. Bridger leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. You got proof of that? Her word against his, and he's apparently got papers saying otherwise. Her word should be enough. In a perfect world, maybe. But we don't live in that world. This Burrell, he's got money, by the sound of it. Probably got lawyers. And the thing about the law, Caleb, is it's not always on the side of what's right. Sometimes it's just on the side of whoever can afford better representation. Then what do I do? Just hand her over? Hell no. Bridger's voice was sharp. I'm saying you need to be smart about this. If he shows up with what looks like legitimate paperwork, even if it's fake as a $3 bill, I'll have to at least hear him out. That's the law. But there's law, and then there's justice. And slavery ended with the war, no matter how fancy he dresses up the language. So you'll help? I'll do my job, which is upholding the law. The 13th Amendment says no one can own another person. If this woman says she was held against her will, that's kidnapping and false imprisonment, but he held up a hand as Caleb started to speak. He's going to argue contract law, debt bondage, all kinds of legal gray areas. It's going to get ugly. I don't care about ugly. I care about keeping Anna safe. Bridger studied him for a long moment. You care about her. This isn't just about honoring a mail-order arrangement anymore, is it? The question caught Caleb off guard, made him examine feelings he hadn't fully acknowledged. Did he care about Anna? Yes, more than he'd expected to, more than was strictly reasonable given they'd known each other barely 2 months. But it wasn't romantic love, wasn't desire, it was something else. Recognition, maybe. The sense of meeting someone whose wounds matched his own, whose survival meant something to him in ways he couldn't fully articulate. She's under my protection, he said finally. That means something. All right. Bridger pulled out paper and began writing. Here's what we do. I'll send telegrams to New Orleans, see if I can verify this man's claims, get information about the fire Anna mentioned, find out if there's any legal pursuit for her as an escaped criminal, which I doubt, because if she was being held illegally, they won't have involved real law enforcement. Meanwhile, you get your affairs in order. Make sure she's documented as your wife, legally speaking. Get married by the circuit preacher when he comes through. That's 3 days from now. Make it official. She doesn't want to marry me. Not really. She's just here because she's running. Doesn't matter what she wants in terms of romance. Matters what gives her legal protection. As your wife, she's got more standing than as your hired help or mail order arrangement. Gives her rights, gives her your name, makes it harder for him to claim her as property. Bridger fixed him with a hard stare. You willing to do that? Marry her legal and proper, knowing she might never be a wife to you in any real sense? If it keeps her safe, yes. Then that's step 1. Step 2 is we make sure the whole town knows what's happening. Get people on your side. Public opinion matters, especially if this goes to any kind of hearing. And step 3. Bridger pulled open a drawer and took out a shotgun, laying it on the desk with a heavy thunk. You make damn sure you're armed and ready if this man decides the law moves too slow for his liking. Caleb left the sheriff's office with a plan and a sick feeling in his stomach. When he got home, Anna was exactly where he'd left her, in the kitchen, staring at nothing, her hands idle in her lap. She looked up as he entered, and the resignation in her eyes cut him deeper than any blade could. I should start packing, she said quietly. Figure out where to run next. Maybe California, maybe Mexico. You're not running. He sat down across from her. And you're not packing. What you're doing is marrying me. She blinked, confusion replacing resignation. What? The circuit preacher comes through in 3 days. We're getting married, legal and binding, with witnesses and paperwork and everything official. Caleb, I can't ask you to do that. To tie yourself to me legally when you're not asking. I'm telling you, it's the best way to give you legal protection. As my wife, you've got rights. You've got my name. It makes it harder for Borrell to claim you as anything other than what you are, a free woman who made a choice. But I'd be trapping you. If you ever wanted to marry someone else, someone whole, stop calling yourself broken, he interrupted, more harshly than he intended, and stop deciding what I want. I'm offering this. Take it or don't, but don't refuse because you think you're doing me some kind of favor. She was quiet for a long moment, studying his face like she was trying to read something written there. Why are you doing this? Really? Because it's right, because you deserve to be safe, and because, he paused, searching for the truth, because I'm tired of being alone, and you're tired of running, and maybe together we can be less tired. That's not love, Anna. It's not romance. But it's something, and sometimes something is enough. Tears welled in her eyes. You'll regret this. When he comes, when you see what kind of man he is, what he's capable of, you'll wish you'd let me run. Let me worry about regret. You worry about getting through the next 3 days without panicking. Can you do that? She nodded slowly, then asked in a small voice, What do I have to do? Show up. Say, I do. Wear something clean. That's it. That's it? That's it. Everything else we figure out as we go. The circuit preacher, Reverend Michaels, arrived right on schedule 3 days later, a portly man with kind eyes and a voice that carried like he was used to preaching to congregations spread across large spaces. He held services in the saloon on Sunday mornings, the only building big enough to hold interested parties, and word had spread that Caleb Merrick was getting married proper to his mail-order bride. The saloon was packed. Walt and Mrs. Gunderson, the Hendersons from the neighboring ranch, Tom Bridger in his unofficial capacity, and a dozen others who'd come for the spectacle or the sense of community, or just because there wasn't much else happening in February in Wyoming territory. Anna stood beside Caleb in a dress Mrs. Gunderson had loaned her. Nothing fancy, just clean and well-made and approximately the right size. Her face was pale, her hands trembling slightly, but she met his eyes when Reverend Michaels began speaking, and in her gaze he saw determination fighting with terror. "Dearly beloved," Michaels began, and launched into the familiar liturgy. Caleb barely heard it, focused on Anna, on the way she was holding herself together through sheer force of will, on the knowledge that in a week, the man who'd brutalized her would walk into this same town claiming ownership. "Do you, Caleb Merrick, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do." The words came out firm, certain. "And do you, Anna Carter, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Anna's voice was barely a whisper, but clear enough. "I do." "Then by the power vested in me by the territory of Wyoming and the grace of God, I pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride." Caleb hadn't thought about this part. He looked at Anna, saw panic flash across her face, and made a quick decision. He leaned in and pressed a chaste kiss to her forehead, nothing more, just a gentle benediction that made her exhale in relief. The small crowd applauded politely. Mrs. Gunderson dabbed at her eyes. Walt produced a bottle of whiskey for toasts, and for a brief moment, it almost felt like a real celebration. But Anna's hand in Caleb's was ice cold, and he could feel her trembling as people offered congratulations she accepted with mechanical politeness. They left as soon as politely possible, riding back to the ranch in silence. Once inside, Anna immediately went to her room, now legally the room of Caleb's wife, though nothing about it had changed, and he heard the lock click with its usual finality. He stood in the front room, a married man for the second time in his life, and wondered if he'd just made the biggest mistake possible or the only right choice available. Time would tell. It always did. The week that followed crawled by with agonizing slowness. Caleb kept busy preparing, cleaning his rifle, making sure the shotgun was loaded and accessible, riding into town daily to check for news. Bridger's telegrams had yielded disturbing information. Samuel Burrell was indeed a real person, wealthy and connected, with business interests throughout Louisiana. The brothel on Dauphine Street had burned in 1875, with 3 casualties, but no criminal investigations had followed because officially it had been a boarding house for young women. And there was no record of anyone looking for Anna Carter or anyone matching her description as an escaped criminal. "Which means she's telling the truth," Bridger said grimly. "They weren't using legal channels because what they were doing was illegal. They can't report her as stolen property because she was never property to begin with, no matter what fake contracts they produced. So we have a case? We have the moral high ground. That's not always the same thing as having a case." Bridger sighed. "But yes, if it comes to it, we can argue she was kidnapped and held against her will, and that makes any contracts void. Problem is, he knows that too. So he's not coming to argue in court. He's coming to intimidate, threaten, or just take what he wants by force. Let him try. That's the spirit that gets men killed, Caleb. Don't let righteousness make you stupid." February 10th arrived with clear, cold skies and the kind of stillness that preceded storms. Caleb rose early, dressed carefully, and loaded both his rifle and pistol with deliberate precision. Anna appeared in the kitchen doorway, already dressed, her face set in that carefully blank expression he'd come to recognize as her armor. "You don't have to come to town," he said. "Might be safer if you stay here." "No." Her voice was firm. "I'm done hiding. If he's coming for me, I'll face him." "Anna, I need to do this, Caleb. I need to stand in front of him and not run. Please." He wanted to argue, wanted to lock her in the house and handle this himself, but he recognized the look in her eyes. This was about more than safety. This was about reclaiming some measure of power, of agency, of refusing to be the victim anymore. "All right, but you stay close to me, and if things get dangerous, you do exactly what I say. Agreed?" "Agreed." They rode into Salvation Creek together and found half the town already gathered in anticipation. News had spread. The mysterious letter, the threat. The question of whether a man could claim another person as property 14 years after the 13th Amendment. It had become the most exciting thing to happen in the territory in months, and people were choosing sides. Most sided with Caleb and Anna. The war was still fresh enough in memory that slavery in any form inspired visceral disgust. But a few, the wealthy, the business-minded, those who believed in contracts and property rights above all else, muttered that if she'd signed papers, she should honor them. Bridger stood on the saloon porch, shotgun cradled casually in his arms, and nodded as Caleb and Anna arrived. "He's not here yet. Stage is running about an hour late." They waited. The whole town waited, tension building like pressure before a thunderstorm. Anna stood rigid beside Caleb, and he could see her breathing carefully, deliberately, like someone trying to control panic through sheer will. Finally, the distant rumble of wheels and hooves echoed down the canyon. The stage was coming. It rolled into town in a cloud of dust, and when it stopped, the door opened to reveal a man who embodied everything Caleb had expected and worse. Samuel Borrell was perhaps 50, dressed in expensive Eastern clothes that looked absurdly out of place in frontier Wyoming. Dark suit, silk cravat, polished boots. His face was handsome in a cold, aristocratic way, with pale eyes that swept the gathered crowd with disdain and landed on Anna with something that made Caleb's hand tighten on his rifle. Possession. That's what that look conveyed. Not desire, not even interest, just the flat, certain knowledge that what he was looking at belonged to him. Two men emerged from the stage behind him, both hard-looking types with guns visible at their hips. Hired muscle, clearly. Borrell had come prepared for resistance. "Well," Borrell said, his voice cultured and carrying, "what a charming little settlement. So rustic." His gaze fixed on Anna, and his smile was a predator's grin. "Hello, Lily. Did you really think you could run far enough that I wouldn't find you?" Anna said nothing, but Caleb felt her flinch at the name, saw the way she wrapped her arms around herself protectively. Caleb stepped forward, putting himself between Borrell and Anna. "Her name is Anna Merrick, my wife, and she's not going anywhere with you." Borrell's smile widened. "Ah, you must be Mr. Merrick, the idealistic homesteader who thinks he can save a fallen woman. How noble, how doomed." He reached into his coat and pulled out folded papers. "I have here a legally binding contract signed by Anna Carter, agreeing to work for a period of 10 years to satisfy her father's debts. She abandoned her position after 7 years, representing a loss of 3 years' value plus damages. I'm here to either collect compensation or recover my property." "She's not property," Bridger said, stepping forward, "and I don't care what fake contracts you wave around. The 13th Amendment ended slavery. She's a free woman." "This isn't slavery, Sheriff. This is contract law. Completely different legal framework." "Contract signed by a 17-year-old girl under duress," Caleb spat. "After she was kidnapped and drugged. That's not a contract, that's a crime." Borrell's expression hardened. "You have proof of these accusations? Witnesses? Documentation? Or just the word of a woman who spent 7 years working in a brothel, a profession not known for its honesty?" The words were designed to shame, to diminish, and Caleb saw Anna shrink slightly. But then something extraordinary happened. She straightened her spine, lifted her chin, and stepped out from behind Caleb to face Borrell directly. "I have the scars you gave me," she said, voice shaking but clear. "I have memories of every single night you visited Madame Laveau's house. I know exactly what kind of man you are, Mr. Borrell. I know you prefer girls who cry. I know you enjoy leaving marks. I know you once broke Sarah's arm because she didn't beg convincingly enough for your liking. Shall I continue? Or would you prefer to keep pretending this is about business?" The crowd had gone absolutely silent. Borrell's face flushed dark with rage, and for a moment Caleb thought he might actually strike her, but the man controlled himself, though his voice came out tight with fury. "Slander. Lies from a woman who would say anything to avoid her obligations." "Then prove she's lying," Bridger said. "You say you have a contract. Show it to me. Let me verify the signature, the terms, the circumstances. Because from where I'm standing, this looks like a man trying to intimidate a woman who escaped sexual slavery." Borrell's eyes narrowed dangerously. "You're making this more difficult than it needs to be, Sheriff. I came here prepared to be reasonable, to offer compensation. But if you insist on complicating matters—" "The only thing complicated here is you," Caleb interrupted. "You're standing in my town, threatening my wife, waving fake papers and calling it law." So here's what's going to happen. You're going to get back on that stage, ride back to whatever hole you crawled out of, and forget Anna exists. Because she's done with you. She's done with that life. And if you try to take her, you'll have to go through me, the sheriff, and every person in this town who's sick of men like you, thinking money gives you the right to own people. The crowd murmured agreement, and Borel seemed to realize for the first time that he'd badly miscalculated. This wasn't an intimidated frontier settlement. These were people who'd fought for ideals, who'd built lives in harsh country, who didn't bow easily to Eastern money and Eastern arrogance. But he wasn't done. Men like Borel never went down without a fight. Very stirring speech, Mr. Merrick, but I'm afraid you've misunderstood the situation. He gestured to his hired men, who moved forward with hands on their weapons. I'm not here to debate philosophy. I'm here to collect what belongs to me, and I'm prepared to use whatever means necessary. That's a threat, Bridger said flatly, and threatening violence in front of a law officer is a crime. You sure you want to go down this road? I want what's mine, Burrell said through clenched teeth. That woman cost me thousands of dollars in lost revenue. I've spent 2 years tracking her down. I'm not leaving empty-handed. Then you're going to be disappointed, Caleb said, raising his rifle slightly, not quite pointing it, but the implication clear. Around him, he heard the metallic clicks of other weapons being readied. Walt Gunderson had a pistol. Tom Bridger's shotgun was now leveled, and several other men in the crowd had produced firearms. Burrell looked around at the bristling arsenal, and his expression twisted into something ugly. You'd start a war over a whore? The word cracked across the silence like a whip, and before Caleb could stop himself, he'd moved forward and driven his fist into Burrell's jaw with every ounce of strength he possessed. Burrell went down hard, blood streaming from his mouth, and his hired men went for their guns. But they were already outdrawn. Bridger's shotgun and Caleb's rifle both aimed at center mass, and a dozen other weapons pointed their direction. Anyone pulls a trigger, they die before they hit the ground, Bridger said calmly. So I'd suggest you boys unholster real slow and drop those weapons in the dirt. The hired men looked at Burrell, who was struggling to his feet, spitting blood and broken tooth. The calculation was visible on their faces. Was the money worth dying for? Apparently not, because they carefully removed their pistols and dropped them. Burrell wiped blood from his mouth, his pale eyes fixed on Caleb with murderous intent. You just made a serious mistake. No, Caleb said. You did. You walked into a town where people still believe in right and wrong, and you tried to claim a human being as property. That ended at Appomattox Burrell. War's over. You lost. This isn't over, Burrell hissed. I have resources, lawyers, connections. I'll tie you up in court for years. I'll bankrupt you. I'll make you wish you'd never— Sheriff Bridger, a new voice interrupted. Everyone turned to see Reverend Michaels stepping forward from the crowd, and in his hands was a thick book of Wyoming territory law. If I might have a moment? Reverend, Bridger nodded. Michaels opened the book to a marked page and read, in his carrying preacher's voice, Wyoming Territory Statute 1869, Section 4. Any person held against their will in service or labor, under any contract made in another state or territory, shall be deemed free upon setting foot in Wyoming Territory, and any attempt to reclaim said person shall be treated as kidnapping and false imprisonment, punishable by fine and imprisonment. He looked up. Wyoming was admitted as a territory with very clear anti-slavery provisions. Any contract made elsewhere is void here. She's free, Mr. Burrell, not because we're being noble or idealistic, but because it's the law. The crowd erupted in agreement, and Burrell looked around at the wall of hostile faces with dawning realization that he'd lost. Not just the argument, but the entire battle. He'd come expecting frontier ignorance and found frontier justice instead. This isn't over, he repeated, but the words had no power now. He was a man used to wielding authority through money and intimidation, and both had failed him. Actually, it is, Bridger said. You've got two choices. Get on that stage and leave, or I arrest you for attempted kidnapping and we see how long you last in a Wyoming jail. Your pick. Burrell stared at Anna with such venom that Caleb shifted to block his view entirely. You'll pay for this, he said to her, to all of them. All of you. Empty threats from a defeated man, Caleb said. Now get out of my town. For a moment it hung in balance. Borel's pride against his survival instinct. Finally, survival won. He gestured sharply to his hired men, and they collected their weapons and climbed back into the stage. As Borel pulled himself up, he turned back one last time. "She'll never be free of what she was," he called out. "Every night you lie beside her, you'll know what she did, how many men, what she was paid for. That's her prison now, Merrick. She'll carry it forever." The words were designed to wound, to plant poison, and Caleb saw Anna flinch as if struck. But before he could respond, she stepped forward, and when she spoke, her voice rang clear and strong across the street. "You're right," she said. "I'll carry it forever. But I'll carry it as someone who survived you, someone who was strong enough to escape, smart enough to run, and brave enough to stop running and face you. So yes, I'll remember. But I'll remember that I won, Mr. Borel. I beat you, and that's all that matters." The silence that followed was profound. Then Walt Gunderson started clapping, slow and deliberate, and others joined in until the entire street was applauding. Anna stood in the center of it, tears streaming down her face, and for the first time since Caleb had met her, she looked like someone who believed she might actually be free. The stage pulled away in a cloud of dust, taking Samuel Borel and his broken pride back toward whatever hell he'd crawled from, and Caleb turned to find Anna looking at him with eyes that held something he'd never seen there before. Hope. "Is it really over?" she asked quietly. "It's really over." She swayed slightly, and he caught her elbow to steady her. "I think I need to sit down. Come on." He guided her toward the saloon, where Mrs. Gunderson was already calling for water and whiskey, and as they walked, Anna leaned against him just slightly, the first time she'd ever initiated physical contact, the first time she'd let herself be vulnerable in front of all these witnesses. Inside the saloon, the crowd that had gathered for violence stayed for celebration. Drinks appeared, toasts were made, and people came up to Anna with words of support and solidarity that left her simultaneously overwhelmed and moved. "You did good, girl," Walt told her. "Standing up to him like that took guts." "I was terrified," Anna admitted. "Courage ain't the absence of fear, it's doing what needs doing despite the fear. You got courage in spades." As the afternoon wore on and people gradually dispersed back to their lives, Caleb and Anna found themselves alone at a corner table. She was exhausted. He could see it in every line of her body, but there was also a lightness to her that hadn't been there before. Like a weight she'd carried for years had finally been set down. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for standing with me, for believing me, for—" She gestured helplessly. "For everything." "You don't need to thank me for doing what's right. Most people wouldn't have. Most people would have seen a damaged woman and decided I wasn't worth the trouble. Then most people are idiots." He met her eyes. "You hear what Borel said at the end? About you carrying it forever?" She flinched. "Yes." "He's wrong, or at least he's only half right. You'll carry the memory, sure. Can't escape that. But you don't have to carry the shame. That belongs to the men who bought and sold you, not to you. You were a victim, Anna. What they did to you doesn't define who you are." Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. "How can you be so certain? You don't know what I did, what I had to do to survive." "I know you survived. That's all that matters. The rest is just noise." He reached across the table and carefully, giving her every opportunity to pull away, placed his hand palm up on the worn wood between them. "You're free now. Legally, officially, free. Time to start believing it." For a long moment she stared at his hand like it was a foreign object. Then, slowly, she reached out and laid her fingers across his palm. The lightest touch, barely contact at all, but deliberate and chosen. Her hand was cold and trembling, but it stayed there, and Caleb felt something shift between them. Not love, not yet, maybe never, but connection, trust, the beginning of something that might, someday, become more. They sat like that as the saloon emptied around them, two damaged people choosing each other despite every reason not to. And outside the Wyoming wind howled promises of the long winter still ahead. But inside, in that moment, there was warmth and something that felt almost like home. They rode home in the gathering dusk, the mountains painted purple against a sky going pink and gold. Anna sat her horse differently now, Not the rigid, defensive posture Caleb had grown accustomed to, but something softer, more natural, like a rope that had been wound too tight for too long had finally been allowed to slacken. She still watched the horizon, still scanned the tree line, but it was observation now rather than vigilance born of terror. "Do you think he'll really give up?" she asked as they crested the final rise before the ranch came into view. "Or will he send others?" Caleb had been thinking about this all afternoon. "He might try, but it won't matter. You're legally my wife now, documented and witnessed. And after today, the whole territory knows your story. He'd have to kidnap you in broad daylight, and that's a risk even his money and connections can't protect him from." He glanced over at her. "You're safe, Anna. As safe as anyone can be in this world." She nodded slowly, then said something that surprised him. "I'm not used to safe, don't know what to do with it." "Learn, I guess, same as anything else." The house welcomed them with warmth and the familiar smells of home. Wood smoke, coffee, the faint scent of bread Anna had baked that morning in what felt like a lifetime ago. Inside, Anna moved through the rooms, touching things lightly, as if reassuring herself they were still real, still hers to touch. "I'll make supper," she said, but there was no urgency in it, no desperate need to prove her worth through labor. "Or we could just eat bread and cheese and call it good," Caleb suggested. "Been a long day. Don't have to be productive every minute." She looked at him with surprise. Then a small smile ghosted across her face, the first genuine smile he'd seen from her, and it transformed her entirely, made her look younger, softer, like someone who might actually know how to be happy given enough practice. "Bread and cheese sounds perfect," she said. They ate at the kitchen table, and for the first time since she'd arrived, the silence between them felt comfortable rather than fraught. Caleb found himself studying her in the lamplight, noticing details he'd been too preoccupied to see before. The way her hair caught copper highlights, how her hands moved with unconscious grace when she wasn't thinking about them, the small scar above her left eyebrow that suggested childhood mischief rather than adult trauma. "What?" she asked, catching him looking. "Nothing. Just, you look different. Lighter, somehow." "I feel different. Like something that's been sitting on my chest for 7 years finally got up and walked away." She paused, then added quietly, "I didn't think it was possible to face him and not break apart, but I did it. We did it. You did most of the heavy lifting. That speech you gave about surviving him, beating him, that was all you. I couldn't have said it if you weren't standing beside me." Her eyes met his, serious and intent. "I need you to understand that. For 7 years I was alone with it, and being alone made me weak, made me someone who just ran and hid. But having you there, knowing I wasn't facing it by myself, that made me strong enough to fight back." The words settled between them, weighted with meaning that went beyond gratitude. Caleb felt something shift in his chest, some wall he'd built after Margaret died cracking just enough to let light through. "You were never weak," he said. "You survived 7 years of hell. That's not weakness. That's the strongest thing I've ever heard of." She looked away, but not before he saw her eyes glisten with tears. "I'm tired of crying," she said, almost to herself. "I've cried more in the last 3 months than I did in 7 years. You'd think I'd be out of tears by now." "Maybe you're finally safe enough to cry. Can't afford to break down when you're running, but now you can. Is that what this is? Permission to fall apart?" "If you need it, though you seem to be holding together pretty well to me." She laughed, a real laugh this time, and shook her head. "I'm good at pretending. Years of practice." "Then stop pretending, at least here, at least with me. Be whoever you actually are, not who you think you should be." The request seemed to catch her off guard. She studied him for a long moment, then asked, "What if I don't know who that is anymore? What if Lily took up so much space that there's nothing left of Anna?" "Then you figure it out, piece by piece, day by day, no rush, you've got time now." Time. The word hung in the air like a promise. For someone who'd lived moment to moment, survival to survival, the concept of time, of a future that stretched beyond the next crisis, was almost incomprehensible. That night, Anna didn't immediately retreat to her room after supper. Instead, she settled in the chair by the fire, and Caleb took his usual spot on the floor with his back against the sofa, and they sat in comfortable silence watching flames dance and shadows play across the walls. "Can I ask you something?" Anna said eventually. Anything. Your wife, Margaret. What was she like? The question should have hurt, should have reopened wounds Caleb had spent 3 years trying to close. But somehow it didn't. Maybe enough time had finally passed, or maybe Anna's presence had changed something fundamental about how he carried his grief. She was good, he said simply, kind and practical and patient with my rough edges. We grew up together, knew each other since we were children. Getting married felt as natural as breathing. She wanted babies, a house full of them. Used to talk about how we'd need to add rooms, build a bigger table. He paused, remembering. The pregnancy was hard from the start. She was sick constantly, couldn't keep food down. And then in the 8th month, something went wrong. The midwife came, did everything she could, but he stopped, the old grief surfacing but not overwhelming him. They both died. Margaret first, then the boy a few hours later. He was perfect, Anna. 10 tiny fingers, 10 tiny toes, just never took a breath. I'm sorry, Anna whispered. That's a terrible loss. It was. Still is in some ways, but it's different now. The sharp edges have worn smooth. I can remember her without it destroying me. He looked at Anna. That's what time does, I guess. Doesn't erase the pain, just makes it bearable. Do you think that will happen with me? With what I carry? I think it already is happening. You faced Burrell today and didn't shatter. That's healing, even if it doesn't feel like it. She was quiet for a long time, staring into the fire. Then, so softly he almost missed it, she said, I think I'd like to try sleeping without locking my door tonight. The statement was small but monumental. Caleb understood immediately what it meant. Not an invitation, not a romantic overture, but a gesture of trust. A declaration that she felt safe enough, finally, to sleep without barricading herself behind locked doors. You don't have to, he said carefully. Not for me. Take whatever time you need. I'm not doing it for you. I'm doing it for me. Because I'm tired of being afraid in my own home. She stood, and in the firelight, her shadow stretched long and tall across the floor. Good night, Caleb. Good night, Anna. She walked to her room, and Caleb heard the familiar sound of the door closing. But this time, notably, there was no click of the lock engaging. Just silence, and the crackle of the fire, and the feeling that something significant had just shifted in the careful balance they'd been maintaining. He sat up late that night, feeding the fire and thinking about healing and time and the strange paths that brought people together. When he finally went to his own room, he lay awake listening to the house settle around him, and for the first time in 3 years, the silence didn't feel oppressive. It felt peaceful. The days that followed fell into a new rhythm, different from before. Anna still worked hard, that was too ingrained to change overnight, but she also began to do things that had nothing to do with proving her worth. She'd sit on the porch in the afternoon sun with a book, read for pleasure rather than distraction. She started teaching herself to knit from a pattern book she'd found, produced a lopsided scarf that Caleb wore anyway because it made her laugh. She sang sometimes while cooking, quietly and self-consciously, but the sound filled the house with something it hadn't held since Margaret died, the promise of joy. Caleb noticed other changes too. She startled less when he entered rooms, started making eye contact during conversations instead of studying the floor. The nightmares still came, but less frequently, and when they did, she'd emerge in the morning tired but not destroyed. One morning in early March, Caleb woke to find her already up and outside despite the early hour. He dressed quickly and went to find her, worried something had triggered her into panic. But when he stepped out onto the porch, he found her standing in the yard with her face turned up to the sun, eyes closed, arms spread wide like she was trying to embrace the whole sky. Anna? She opened her eyes and turned to him with a smile that made his breath catch. Do you feel it? Spring coming? The air's different. Warmer, the snow's melting. Won't be real spring for another month at least. But it's coming. I can feel it. She spun in a slow circle, and there was something almost childlike in the gesture, something free and unguarded. I was thinking, when the weather turns, could we plant a garden? I've never had a garden, never stayed anywhere long enough. But maybe here. Of course, we'll plant whatever you want. Tomatoes, she said immediately. And beans, and maybe some flowers. Not practical, I know, but flowers are fine. Margaret always said a house without flowers was just a building. Would have liked you to have them. The mention of Margaret no longer felt like betrayal. Somehow, in ways Caleb didn't fully understand, Anna had carved out her own space in his life without erasing what had come before. They coexisted peacefully, past and present, memory and possibility. It was late March when Anna came to him with something that had clearly been weighing on her mind. They were sitting at supper, and she'd been unusually quiet, pushing food around her plate more than eating. Finally, she set down her fork and looked at him with the kind of determined courage he'd seen when she faced Burrell. "I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear me out before you say anything. Can you do that?" "All right." She took a deep breath. "You've been so patient with me, never pushing, never demanding anything I wasn't ready to give. And I'm grateful for that, more than I can say. But I've been thinking, you married me. You gave me your name, your protection, your home. You stood up for me when it could have cost you everything. And I've given you nothing in return except company, I guess, and work, but not what a man has a right to expect from a wife. Anna, I told you from the start. Let me finish." Her voice was gentle but firm. "I know what you said. I know you don't expect anything. But the truth is, I want to try. Not because I owe you, but because I want to learn how to be close to someone again without terror. I want to understand what it's like when it's not about power or money or use. When it's about, I don't know, partnership, maybe, choice." Caleb's heart was pounding. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that tonight, if you wanted, you could come to my room instead of yours, and we could see what happens. No pressure, no expectations, just trying together." "Anna." He reached across the table and took her hand carefully. "I don't want you to do this because you think you should, because you feel obligated. I don't. I mean, maybe a little. But mostly I want to try because I'm tired of letting them win. Burrell and all the others, they took intimacy from me and made it into a weapon. And I'm tired of letting that weapon control my life. I want to take it back, reclaim it, make it mine again on my terms." Her eyes met his, fierce and determined. "I want them to stop winning." The logic was sound, but Caleb worried about the cost. What if it's too much? What if you panic? Then you stop immediately, and we try again another time, or we don't, and either way it's fine. She squeezed his hand. "I trust you, Caleb. That's not something I ever thought I'd be able to say to a man again, but I trust you, so please, let me try." He studied her face, looking for doubt or fear or the desperate need to please that had characterized so much of her early time here. But what he saw was genuine desire. Not sexual desire necessarily, but the desire to heal, to move forward, to refuse to be defined by trauma forever. "All right," he said quietly, "but we go slow. And the second you need to stop, we stop. No questions, no disappointment. Agreed?" "Agreed." That night, after the dishes were washed and the fire banked, Caleb went to her door and knocked softly. "Anna, you still sure about this?" The door opened. She stood there in her nightgown, hair loose around her shoulders, and he could see she was nervous but resolute. "I'm sure. Come in." He entered, and she closed the door but didn't lock it. Another small declaration of trust. They stood awkwardly for a moment, neither quite sure how to begin this dance they'd both agreed to, but neither had choreographed. "Maybe we could just sit," Anna suggested. "Talk for a while." "That sounds perfect." They sat on the bed, carefully maintaining space between them, and talked about nothing and everything. The garden plans, the cattle, a funny story Walt had told in town last week. Gradually the tension eased, and when Anna finally shifted closer, leaning slightly against his shoulder, it felt natural rather than forced. "Is this okay?" she asked. "More than okay." They sat like that for a long time, just existing in proximity, and Caleb marveled at how something so simple, sitting beside someone, could feel so profound after months of careful distance. When Anna finally turned her face up to his, there was a question in her eyes. "Can you kiss me? Like you mean it, not like I'm fragile?" "You sure? I need to know what it feels like, when it's chosen." So he kissed her. Gently at first, giving her every opportunity to pull away, but when she leaned into it rather than away, He deepened the kiss, let himself feel the warmth of her lips, the softness of her skin, the reality of her presence. When they finally broke apart, Anna was breathing hard, eyes wide, but not with fear, with wonder. That was... She paused, searching for words. Nothing like before. Everything about it was different. That's because before was violence disguised as intimacy. This is actual intimacy. There's no comparison. She touched her lips wonderingly, then looked at him with something that might have been the beginning of desire, real desire, born of safety and trust rather than obligation or fear. Can we do that again? They did. And then more, slow and careful, every touch checked and confirmed, every boundary respected absolutely. Caleb let Anna lead, let her decide pace and direction, and when she finally asked if they could try more, he agreed, but watched her face constantly for signs of distress. There were moments when she had to stop, when some movement or pressure triggered memory and sent her spiraling. Each time, Caleb pulled back immediately, held her while she breathed through it, waited for her signal that she was ready to try again or needed to stop entirely. It was stop and start, awkward and careful, nothing like the passionate encounters described in books or imagined by young lovers. But it was theirs. It was chosen. And when it was finally done and they lay beside each other in the darkness, Anna was crying, not with pain or fear, but with something that looked like relief. "I did it," she whispered. "I actually did it. I thought I'd be broken forever, but I'm not. I'm healing." Caleb pulled her close, let her tuck her head under his chin, felt her gradually relax against him. "You were never broken, just wounded. Big difference." "Caleb?" "Yeah?" "Thank you for being patient, for letting me figure this out at my own pace, for not making me feel like I had to be fixed before I was worthy of this." "You don't thank someone for being decent. That's just baseline humanity." She laughed softly against his chest. "You'd be surprised how rare baseline humanity actually is." They fell asleep like that, tangled together, and when morning came, Caleb woke to find Anna still sleeping peacefully beside him. No nightmares, no restless tossing, just genuine rest. He lay there watching her, this fierce, wounded, courageous woman who'd survived hell, and somehow found her way to his doorstep, and felt something he hadn't felt since Margaret died. Hope for the future. Spring arrived in earnest, bringing mud and new grass, and the kind of frantic activity that characterized ranch life in renewal season. Caleb and Anna worked side by side repairing winter damage, birthing calves, planting the garden she'd dreamed of. The physical labor was exhausting but satisfying, and Anna threw herself into it with the same intensity she brought to everything else. The garden became her special project. She'd spend hours tending it, talking to the seedlings like they were children, celebrating each new shoot with disproportionate joy. Caleb built her a fence to keep out rabbits and deer, and she painted it white with paint left over from the house trim, transforming their practical ranch into something that looked almost cheerful. "It's beautiful," he told her, watching her stand in the middle of her garden with dirt on her knees and satisfaction on her face. "You've got a gift for this. I like making things grow. Seems hopeful somehow. Like if I can take seeds and turn them into food, maybe I can take broken parts of myself and turn them into something whole. That's not a bad philosophy." She smiled and held out a hand. "Help me up? My knees aren't what they used to be." He pulled her to her feet, and she stumbled slightly, catching herself against his chest. Instead of immediately pulling away as she would have months ago, she stayed there for a moment, then reached up and kissed him lightly. "What was that for?" he asked, pleased but surprised. "Because I wanted to, because I can. Because I'm learning that physical affection doesn't have to be a transaction or a trap. It can just be nice." She laughed at his expression. "Don't look so shocked. I'm capable of spontaneous affection, you know." "I'm learning that. Still getting used to it." "Get used to it faster," she teased, and kissed him again before dancing away toward the house, leaving him standing in the garden with his heart doing strange things in his chest. That night she came to his room instead of him going to hers. Another small step in reclaiming her agency, her ability to initiate rather than always respond. They made love slowly, carefully, and afterward she didn't immediately retreat but stayed curled against him, talking about nothing important and everything that mattered. "I've been thinking about the future," she said. What comes after we've planted the garden and the cattle are healthy and winter is just a memory? What about it? I want to do something, not just work the ranch, though I like that, but something more. The town. There's no school, did you notice? The children either learn from their parents or they don't learn at all. You want to teach? Maybe. My father was a teacher. I grew up helping him with lessons, and I think I'd be good at it. Think I'd like giving children something I never got, a sense that the world can be safe and full of possibility. Caleb heard the unspoken message beneath the words. She wanted to take her trauma and transform it into something generative, wanted to turn survival into purpose. I think you'd be an incredible teacher. We'd need to build a schoolhouse, gather supplies, convince parents to send their kids. I know it's not practical. It's probably a silly dream. It's not silly. And we'll make it happen, somehow. If that's what you want, we'll figure it out. She was quiet for a moment, then said, "How did I get so lucky? To find you, of all people, in all the world." I could ask the same thing. No, I'm serious. What are the odds that I'd run to Wyoming, that you'd place an ad, that I'd answer it, that you'd be exactly the kind of man who could help me heal instead of hurt me worse? It seems impossible. Maybe it is impossible. Maybe we're both dreaming and we'll wake up to something terrible. Or maybe, he paused, thinking, maybe sometimes life gives you what you need exactly when you need it. Not as reward or punishment, just as grace, I guess. Unearned and undeserved, but real anyway. Grace, Anna repeated softly. I like that. I want to name her that. Caleb's heart stopped. Name who what? Anna took his hand and placed it on her stomach, and even though there was nothing to feel yet, the gesture was clear. I'm pregnant. Been suspecting for a few weeks, but I'm sure now. Due sometime in late fall, I think. The world seemed to tilt and resettle. A baby. Anna was carrying his child. After Margaret, after the son who never breathed, he'd convinced himself that fatherhood simply wasn't meant for him. But here it was anyway, arriving unexpectedly like everything else good in his life lately. You're sure? His voice came out rough with emotion. I'm sure. Is this okay? I know we didn't exactly plan it, and I know you lost a child before, and I don't want to cause you pain. He stopped her words with a kiss, fierce and full of all the feelings he couldn't quite articulate. When he pulled back, there were tears on both their faces. It's more than okay, he said. It's a gift. You're a gift. All of this is a gift I never expected to receive. Grace, Anna said again. If it's a girl, I want to name her Grace. Because that's what this is. Unearned and undeserved, but real anyway. And if it's a boy? She thought about it. Thomas. After my father. He died thinking I'd betrayed him, but maybe if we name a child after him, it's a way of saying he wasn't forgotten, that his memory can be part of something good. Grace or Thomas Merrick, Caleb said, trying out the names. I like them both. They lay awake late into the night making plans, dreaming about the future, and for the first time since Margaret died, Caleb let himself believe in possibility again. Not just survival, but actual happiness. Not just endurance, but joy. Summer came with heat and long days and the kind of abundance that made spring's mud and work worthwhile. The garden exploded with growth, producing more vegetables than two people could eat. So Anna started taking baskets to town, trading produce for supplies and building relationships with the other ranch wives and town women. They'd been wary of her at first, the mail-order bride with the mysterious past, but Anna's quiet competence and genuine kindness gradually won them over. Mrs. Gunderson, in particular, became an unlikely ally. She appeared at the ranch one afternoon in June with a basket of baby clothes, handed them over with gruff embarrassment, and said, "These were my daughter's before she grew out of them. Figured you could use them." Anna had hugged her impulsively, and Mrs. Gunderson had patted her back awkwardly and muttered something about foolish sentiment before retreating quickly. But after that, she always had a kind word when Anna came to the store, and her husband Walt became downright friendly, teasing Caleb about impending fatherhood with the ease of genuine affection. The town, Caleb realized, had claimed Anna as one of their own, not despite her past, but in full knowledge of it. They'd stood with her against Burrell, and that shared experience had bound her to them in ways that would have taken years to develop otherwise. She wasn't just Caleb's wife. She was Miss Anna, who grew the best tomatoes in the territory and had a kind word for everyone and was going to teach their children once the baby came and she had time to set up a proper school. As summer faded into early fall and Anna's belly grew round with promise, Caleb found himself thinking often about how far they'd both come. From the skeletal, terrified woman who'd stepped off the stagecoach 8 months ago to the glowing, confident person now humming while canning vegetables. The transformation was extraordinary. Not complete, maybe never complete, but so much further along the path than either of them had dreamed possible. She still had bad days. Days when something would trigger memory and send her spiraling into anxiety or depression. Days when she couldn't bear to be touched, when she'd retreat into herself and all Caleb could do was give her space and wait for the storm to pass. But those days came less frequently now, and she recovered faster, armed with tools and understanding she'd developed over months of healing. And Caleb had changed too. The house was no longer a tomb, but a home, filled with laughter and conversation and the mundane chaos of living rather than merely existing. He caught himself singing while doing chores, making plans that extended beyond the next season, imagining a future with children running through the rooms and Anna teaching a schoolhouse full of eager students and himself growing old beside someone who understood both his grief and his hope. It was late October, with the aspens turned gold and the air carrying the sharp promise of winter, when Anna woke him in the middle of the night with calm certainty. It's time. Time for... His brain caught up with reality. The baby. It's coming? The baby is coming. Contraction started around midnight. They're still far apart, but steady. We should get Mrs. Henderson. She said she'd midwife when it was time. Caleb, dressed with hands that shook despite his best efforts to stay calm, rode through darkness to the Henderson ranch and returned with Sarah Henderson, a woman who'd birthed 6 children of her own and helped deliver dozens more. She took one look at Anna, nodded with satisfaction, and said, "First babies take their time. We've got hours yet. Caleb, make yourself useful and boil water." He'd never understood why boiling water was necessary during childbirth. It seemed like busy work designed to keep anxious fathers occupied. But he did it anyway, and then paced, and then tried to sit, and then paced some more, while Anna labored with a focus and determination that was somehow both terrifying and inspiring. Hours passed. The sun rose and set again. Anna progressed from calm to intense to barely human, lost in the primal work of bringing life into the world. And Caleb, watching her suffer through pain he couldn't ease, understanding for the first time what Margaret had endured, felt helpless and awed in equal measure. "You're doing so well," Sarah kept saying. "Almost there. Just a little more." But almost there stretched into another hour, then another. And Caleb saw exhaustion starting to claim Anna, saw her losing the fight against her own body. He moved to her side, took her hand, and when she looked at him with eyes that said she couldn't do this anymore, he said, "Yes, you can. You survived 7 years of hell. You can survive this. You're the strongest person I know. Come on, Anna, bring our baby into the world." Something in his words or his voice reached her, and she bore down with renewed determination, and suddenly Sarah was saying, "The head! I see the head!" And then there was a rush and a gush, and a moment of terrible silence before a cry. Thin and reedy and absolutely perfect, the sound of new life announcing itself. "It's a girl," Sarah said, tears streaming down her weathered face. "A beautiful, healthy girl." She placed the baby on Anna's chest, and Caleb watched his wife, his real wife, not just in name, but in every way that mattered, cradle their daughter with wonder and exhaustion and overwhelming love written across her face. "Hello, Grace," Anna whispered. "Hello, my beautiful girl. You're safe here. You're loved. You're home." The baby, as if understanding, quieted and nuzzled against her mother, and Caleb felt something break open in his chest that he hadn't known was still closed, the last piece of grief and guilt and fear that had lived there since Margaret died, finally releasing its grip. "She's perfect," he said, voice thick with emotion. "You're both perfect." Anna looked up at him with a smile that held the whole world. "We made a miracle. We took all that pain and darkness and made something beautiful. That's the best revenge, isn't it? Living well, loving well, creating joy from ashes. That's the best revenge." he agreed. Sarah cleaned and fussed and finally declared them all healthy and ordered Caleb to let Anna rest. But before she left, she pulled him aside with an expression that was part satisfaction, part warning. "That woman of yours," Sarah said, "she's been through hell, and she came out the other side. But childbirth has a way of stirring up old trauma, especially in women who've been hurt like she has. You watch for signs of sadness that doesn't lift, fear that doesn't make sense, detachment from the baby. If you see any of that, you come get me immediately. Understood?" "Understood. But I don't think we'll have that problem. Anna's stronger than she looks." "Strong people can still break, Caleb. Just keep watch." He promised he would, but in the days that followed, his worry proved unnecessary. Anna took to motherhood with the same fierce determination she brought to everything else, nursing Grace with single-minded focus, talking to her constantly, studying her tiny features like she was trying to memorize every detail. "She has your eyes," Anna observed one evening as they sat together, Grace sleeping between them. "And your stubborn chin. She has your nose, and I suspect she'll have your courage, given time. I hope she has your kindness, your certainty that the world can be good despite evidence to the contrary." Anna touched the baby's impossibly small hand. "I want her to grow up feeling safe, knowing she's loved unconditionally, having choices. She will. We'll make sure of it." Winter arrived properly in mid-November, bringing snow that transformed the ranch into something from a fairy tale. Anna would stand at the window with Grace, pointing out the way light caught on ice crystals, how the chickens left three-toed tracks, describing the world to a baby too young to understand but listening anyway, building vocabulary for when comprehension caught up. Christmas came quietly, their first as a family. Caleb carved wooden blocks for Grace, though she was too young to appreciate them, and Anna made a rag doll from fabric scraps, and they exchanged small practical gifts with the awkwardness of people still learning how to celebrate together. But there was joy in it, real joy, the kind that came from choosing to build traditions rather than inheriting them. On Christmas evening, after Grace had been settled in her cradle, Caleb had built it from cherry wood, spent weeks on the intricate carvings that decorated the sides. Anna came to him where he sat by the fire and curled into his lap with the casual intimacy of someone who no longer questioned her right to affection. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For seeing me, the real me beneath all the damage and fear, for believing I was worth saving when I didn't believe it myself, for giving me this—" She gestured around the room, encompassing house and baby and life they'd built, when I thought I'd never have anything resembling normal again. "You saved yourself, Anna. I just gave you a safe place to do it. We saved each other, I think. You were as lost as I was, just in a different way, and we found our way out together." He kissed the top of her head, breathed in the scent of her hair, soap and milk and something indefinably her. "Think we'll make it? Long term?" "I know we will, because we're both too stubborn to quit, and too grateful for what we've found to take it for granted. That's a pretty good foundation for forever." Forever. The word didn't scare him anymore. With Anna curled against him and Grace sleeping peacefully nearby, and snow falling soft outside, forever sounded not like a burden, but a promise, one he intended to keep. Spring returned as it always did, the world renewing itself in green and growing things. Anna's garden expanded, her teaching plans solidified, and Grace grew from helpless infant into a baby who smiled and laughed and recognized her parents with obvious delight. One afternoon in May, Caleb came in from checking cattle to find Anna on the porch with Grace, both of them bathed in golden light. Anna had planted flowers along the porch rail, impractical, beautiful things that served no purpose except joy, and they nodded in the breeze like they were agreeing with some cosmic truth. Anna looked up as he approached, and her smile was the kind that reached all the way to her eyes, genuine and unguarded. "Look at your daughter. She rolled over 3 times today. She's going to be mobile before we know it, and then we're in trouble." "We're already in trouble," Caleb said, climbing the steps and sitting beside them. "She's got us wrapped around her tiny fingers." "That's how it should be." Anna handed him the baby, and Grace immediately grabbed his beard with the kind of grip that suggested she had her mother's determination. "I was thinking, maybe next year we could add on to the house, build a proper schoolroom, start teaching the neighbor children, make it official. I think that's a fine idea. And maybe, she paused, glanced at him sideways with something that might have been nervousness. Maybe in a year or two, give Grace a sibling, if you want to, I mean. No pressure. The question caught him off guard, but in a good way. The idea of more children, of filling the house with noise and chaos and love, didn't terrify him the way it might have a year ago. It felt like natural progression, like the universe offering second chances to people brave enough to take them. I'd like that, he said. When you're ready, no rush. No rush, she agreed. We've got time now, that's the gift, isn't it? Not running anymore, not looking over our shoulders, just living, building something that lasts. They sat on the porch as afternoon faded to evening, the mountains painting themselves purple and pink against a sky going gold, and Caleb thought about the journey that had brought them here. From a plain advertisement in a mail-order bride catalog to this moment of quiet perfection, the path had been neither straight nor easy. But every difficult step had been necessary, every moment of pain leading to this possibility of joy. Anna had come to him broken and running, carrying scars visible and invisible. She taught him that survival was its own kind of strength, that healing wasn't linear, that love could be built carefully from foundations of trust and patience rather than arriving fully formed in a blaze of passion. And he'd given her, what? Safety, certainly, space to heal. But more than that, he'd given her belief that she was worthy of kindness, that her past didn't define her future, that she could choose her own story rather than being trapped in the one written for her by cruel men. They'd saved each other, just as she'd said. Two wounded people choosing each other despite every reason not to, and discovering that sometimes the best love stories weren't the ones that began with fireworks and passion, but the ones that began with honesty and grew slowly into something unbreakable. Grace made a contented sound, and Anna laughed, and the wind carried the scent of growing things and new possibilities across the ranch. The past would always be there, carried in scars and memories and occasional nightmares. But the future stretched out before them, full of promise and possibility, and the certainty that whatever came, they would face it together. Anna had survived the unthinkable. Caleb had survived loss that would have destroyed lesser men. And together, they'd learned that survival wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning. The real story was what you built afterward, how you took the pieces of your broken life and assembled them into something worth keeping. As stars began to appear in the darkening sky and the first lamps were lit in distant ranch houses, Caleb held his daughter and sat beside his wife and thought about Grace. Unearned, undeserved, but absolutely real. Grace that had brought Anna to his door, Grace that had given them both a second chance, Grace sleeping peacefully in his arms, living proof that from ashes and pain and terrible history, beauty could still bloom. "I love you," Anna said quietly, the words still new enough to carry weight. "I know I don't say it enough, but I do. More than I thought I could love anyone. More than I knew I was capable of." "I love you too," Caleb replied, and meant it with an intensity that surprised him. Not the comfortable affection he'd felt for Margaret, but something forged in fire, tested by trauma, and proven stronger than either of them standing alone could ever be. They stayed on the porch until full dark, a family against the vast wilderness, small but undefeated, scarred but healing, and absolutely, defiantly alive. The unthinkable had been survived, the impossible had been overcome. And tomorrow, and all the tomorrows after, they would wake up and choose each other again. And that would be enough. That would be everything.